The devastation of the Nasser and Al-Shifa hospitals in Gaza, as well as the reports of mass graves discovered at the locations during Israeli assaults, have horrified the UN Special Representative for Human Rights. Volker Turk demanded that the deaths be the subject of impartial inquiries. Nearly 300 people's remains had been excavated in Nasser, according to Palestinian officials. When they were buried and how they passed away are unknown. Claims that the Israeli military buried remains there were deemed baseless by them. However, it did state that troops examined bodies buried by Palestinians in places where intelligence indicated the possible presence of hostages during a 2-week operation at the hospital in the city of Khan Yunis in February. The 10 hostages that were freed a while ago claimed to have spent a significant amount of time being detained in Nasser Hospital. Staff at Nasser had claimed that they were being forced to bury remains in the hospital's courtyard due to surrounding fighting preventing access to cemeteries before the Israeli raid. Al-Shifa has already released similar reports prior to the November 1 Israeli raid on the hospital. Although Hamas and medical authorities have refuted the Israeli military's allegations, it has raided several hospitals in Gaza during the conflict on the grounds that Hamas fighters had been operating inside. On October 7, Hamas terrorists launched an unprecedented cross-border raid on southern Israel, murdering over 1,200 people, the majority of whom were civilians, and capturing 253 more as prisoners back in Gaza. This marked the start of the conflict. Since then, over 34,180 people have died in Gaza, the most of them women and children, according to the health ministry operated by Hamas in the region. According to a UN Human Rights Office spokesman, the organization is presently investigating allegations from Palestinian authorities that 283 bodies, 42 of which had been identified, had been discovered on the premises of Nasser Hospital. Reporters in Geneva were told by Ravina Shamdasani that victims had reportedly been buried deep in the ground and covered with waste. Among the deceased were allegedly older people, women and wounded, while others were found with their hands tied and stripped of their clothes. This should include international investigators given the prevailing climate of impunity, Mr. Turk said in calling for independent, thorough, and public inquiries into the fatalities. According to international humanitarian law, hospitals are entitled to extremely particular protection. It is also a war crime to deliberately kill civilians, detainees, and other people who are hors de combat, or not taking part in hostilities. The bodies of a large number of people who had been killed during the war and buried in a makeshift cemetery in the hospital's courtyard had reportedly been moved during the Israeli raid, a spokesman for the Hamas-run Civil Defense Force told BBC Arabic's Gaza Today program on Monday. After research and investigation, we learned that the occupation Israeli army had established a mass grave, pulled out the bodies that were in Nasser Hospital, and buried them in this mass grave, Basil stated. Speaking with Gaza Today, another guy claimed to be looking for the bodies of 2 male relatives who he claimed Israeli troops had seized during the country's just-ended attack in Khan Yunis. After I had buried them in an apartment, the Israelis came and moved their bodies, he stated. Every day we search for their bodies, but we fail to find them. Without offering any proof, Hamas has claimed that among the corpses are those who were executed in cold blood by Israeli forces. In a statement released on Tuesday, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, declared, the claim that the IDF buried Palestinian bodies is baseless and unfounded. Bodies buried by Palestinians in the vicinity of Nasser Hospital were investigated during the IDF operation in that region in order to locate hostages and missing persons. The inspection was carried out with caution and only in areas where intelligence suggested hostages might be present. The deceased's dignity was preserved during the examination, which was conducted with deference. Examined bodies that did not belong to Israeli hostages were put back in their proper locations. During the attack, according to the IDF, its forces had taken about 200 terrorists who were in the hospital into custody and had discovered ammunition and unused medications meant for Israeli hostages. The raid was conducted in a targeted manner and without harming the hospital, the patients, and the medical staff, it further demanded. But after being held during the raid, 3 medical staff members said to the BBC last month that they were subjected to hours of kneeling, beatings, and humiliation. They were also soaked with cold water. After the Israeli occupation, medical staff who stayed at Nasser claimed they were unable to treat patients and that 13 people had died as a result of the hospital's conditions, which included a shortage of resources including water and electricity. Israeli forces left Gaza City's Al-Shifa hospital on April 1, after what the IDF described as another, precise, operation in response to information that Hamas had reconvened there. During the 2-week attack, 200 terrorists were slain in and around the hospital, according to what the IDF said at the time. It also stated that weapons and intelligence had been discovered throughout the hospital, and that more than 500 people had been placed under arrest. 5 days later, after a team was allowed to enter the facility, the World Health Organization (WHO) declared Al-Shifa to be now an empty shell, with the majority of the buildings severely damaged or destroyed and the equipment mostly converted to ashes. Additionally, many dead bodies were partially buried with their limbs visible, and numerous shallow graves had been excavated close outside the emergency room, as well as the administrative and surgical facilities, according to the report. Additionally, the IDF declared that it had spared the patients at Al-Shifa. However, the WHO reported that the acting hospital director said that during the siege, patients were kept in appalling conditions and that at least 20 patients perished as a result of limited medical staff movement and lack of access to care. According to reports obtained by the UN Human Rights Office, 12 of the 30 victims thought to be interred in the 2 graves have been identified, according to spokeswoman Ms. Shamdasani. On April 9, a representative for Gaza's civil defense informed CNN that 381 bodies had been found near Al-Shifa. However, the number did not include those interred on the hospital's property. The leading UN human rights envoy also denounced as beyond warfare the Israeli strikes of the last 3 days on the southern city of Rafah, which he claimed had killed primarily women and children. One of the attacks occurred on Saturday night, following which the mother of the prematurely born child was killed together with her husband and another daughter. Additionally, Mr. Turk issued a fresh warning against an Israeli ground invasion of Rafah, the sanctuary for 1.5 million displaced residents, claiming that such an action would result in additional violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. The Israel Defense Forces responded by stating that it was working to destroy Hamas's military and administrative infrastructure. In stark contrast to Hamas' intentional attacks on Israeli men, women and children, the IDF follows international law and takes feasible precautions to mitigate civilian harm, it stated.